Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adrian Salmon from GG+A. I'm delighted to welcome you to this live webinar, Giving Appeals in the Time of Coronavirus, What We Can Learn from Examples. I'm joined by my colleague Jason Shough, Vice President in our Communications Practice Area, and really delighted to have our two special guests with us here today, Sylvia, Racca and Tim Poisson from Dartmouth College. So we're going to be talking to you about particularly how Dartmouth has flexed its approach to the Dartmouth College Fund over the last couple of months. But before we do that, Jason and I wanted to just talk you through some key metrics and key principles to do with mass appeals, with annual giving appeals. And so we're going to do that now. And I'll kick off and talk a little bit about some important metrics. So most of us are pivoting to digital in a big way. And the best metrics for online fundraising that I know of are the M&R online benchmarks that are now in their 10th or even 11th year of being produced. These are benchmarks for around 100 US nonprofits take part every year with raw data, so it's really great information. And these are fundraising email message rates by type and sector. So across the top, you can see the different verticals, cultural, environmental, all the way over to animal welfare. Down the side here, you can see the different kinds, fundraising, advocacy, which is for campaigning organizations, political organizations, petition signing, and so on, and newsletter. And you can see that overall, the response rate for fundraising emails is 0.06%, which is not high. It means you need on average to send around 1,600 fundraising emails to get one gift. Now, you may be thinking also that click-through rate or open rate would be, the next most important metrics for you to look at. But actually they're not, because M&R tried to correlate those a couple of years ago to fundraising response rates, and they found zero correlation. There's very little relationship between open rates and click-through rates and how well your fundraising email finally performs. What there is a big correlation between is between response rate and page completion rate. Now, page completion rate is something that I found very few fundraisers tend to know about their online giving pages. It is very simply the percentage of visitors to your main donation page who actually complete the donation process. And across the nonprofit sector, it's really low, 14%, which means that fewer than 1 in 5 visitors to a fundraising donation page actually complete the gift. And there may be all kinds of reasons for that, but a lot of it is to do with poorly optimized donation pages and poorly optimized in particular for mobile. So if we go on and look at that, you can see that overall, per 1,000 fundraising emails, you'd expect to raise about $45. There are differences by sector. Cultural organizations can do a lot better, hunger and poverty and international as well. It also helps if you're small. You tend to do a lot better, you tend to do a bit better than large or medium-sized organizations. And also from what I've seen from my clients' results, educational institutions, higher educational institutions tend to do a lot better than this. They're up to about $100 or $200 per 1,000 fundraising emails sent. So we talked about the conversion rate, and it varies according to platform. As you might expect, desktop has the highest conversion rate at 21%. The problem is that there's a big shift away from desktop nowadays. Very few people now are accessing websites on desktop compared to on mobile or tablet devices. And you can see here that the conversion rates for mobile and tablet devices are quite significantly lower, as indeed are the average gifts. So you must have your donation pages optimized for mobile. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have if you want to get the kind of conversion and thus the kind of response to your fundraising emails that you hope to get. So I'm going to hand over here to Jason, having talked about that, and he's going to talk a little bit about the writing principles for annual giving appeals.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, this is Jason Shough in our communications practice at GG+A. As we've mentioned, in a few minutes, Sylvia and Tim will let us in on some of the real-time thinking behind the scenes on these aspects. But, before that, we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the principles that go into writing great appeals. And regardless of what's going on in the world, these are those universal threads that are always important to keep in mind and remember. So, we'll tell these in little chunks here, but the first, it has to tell a story. In all my experience, the appeals I've written and that have performed the best, the ones that I've read that have made the biggest impression on me are the ones that have all the elements of a good story. And that could include, key characters, tension, resolution, all of the kind of major factors. Also, don't be afraid of writing long copy. I think this is an important thing to keep in mind because we often assume too much about people's attention spans and reading habits, especially today. Or we've internalized adages about, writing shorter takes more time and effort. It's a little more artful, but, as we'll see today later, and as GG+A research has, continued to, bear out here, is that sometimes long copy is more compelling, especially when the story is worth telling. And in fact, it often performs better than those, just short, punchy bursts. So, the third thing on our list, and if we could advance slides. Let's see. Yeah, so the next two, number 3 here, is just to make sure that we're balancing the I or the we part of the story with enough of the you part of the story. And what is the role of your reader and donor? And we want to make sure that that message is clear and that we make it prevalent and that we make it strong enough in our piece so that the reader never walks away thinking, well, I wonder what I was supposed to do, or I wonder what they wanted me to do here. And along that line, thinking about what the appeal looks like is super valuable and important. What do people see when they open the mailbox, or what do they feel when they read the envelope teaser copy? Are they delighted when they open the letter or flip through the piece of collateral? The copy and the design really need to work together and build upon one another to create, a unique, authentic experience, and that's critical to remember. And once you've done that, you'll want to do something that can be pesky and even brutal sometimes, but that's really essential, and that's reading it aloud. We like to say this because this just helps make sure that what you're writing for the public audience can really be as clear and compelling as it possibly can be, and we stress that a lot. Of course, then as I mentioned, you need a specific action that you want your reader to take, and focus those calls to action on achieving that outcome. And that may mean fewer calls to action overall throughout the piece or the letter. And maybe it means positioning them more strongly at the heart of the appeal. It really depends on the kind of experience you're building, but the key there is just to make sure that they're prevalent. And just like we mentioned earlier, we never want our reader walking away wondering what they should do. Finally, kind of a great thing to remember here is just to make good use of a postscript. And there's always one more thing your reader can do to help. There's always one more detail of the story that's critical for them to know. So we don't want to miss that opportunity to remind people one last step they can take. And of course, always how much we value and need them in the effort. If we go to the next slide, we just have a couple more quick points before we move on here to kind of the main event. I'll go through these really quickly. One thing, if earlier this week, you may have tuned in, our Senior Vice President, Melinda Church, spoke with Leah Brady at American University. And in that conversation, which was great, Leah shared these excellent points to consider before sending solicitations. And they're smart and fun, and we wanted to steal them and share them here before we get let in on the backs or into the kind of the thinking behind the Dartmouth Fund. And the first one, I'll go very quickly on these. The first one is, should we do this particular thing? I love the way this is worded. It brings us back to the basics and makes us really consider, what is it that we want to achieve with this piece, and using this kind of language makes us think in first principles. If yes, what's our approach? So what's the tone? What's the theme? This is something we'll hear our guests inspire us with here today. Does our segmentation strategy need to be adjusted? This is critical, to reach our goal with this appeal. What do we ultimately need to consider about our audience? Has anything changed? Do we need to update our perceptions on the core audience we're trying to reach? This is always, a great thing to consider. How can we add more stewardship, specifically prior to the end of the fiscal year? This can often be overlooked, and I love how this set of questions reminds us that it really shouldn't be. Finally, is there anything not on here that we should be doing? Really kind of the icing type question. At the highest possible level, are we seeing this effort clearly and executing on what we hope that it will achieve or what it needs to achieve? Is there anything else that can help us reach that end goal? It's really just kind of a capstone question to ask to make sure we're all thinking as strategically as possible about our communication. So there you have it. There's five things to consider as we turn next to our colleagues from Dartmouth, whom Adrian will introduce to us here.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, we're delighted to have Sylvia and Tim available to talk to us today. And they've also very kindly offered, as you may know, we can't take questions and answer questions live because this is just a half-an-hour webinar, but Sylvia and Tim have kindly offered to help us answer any questions you may have for them afterwards, and we'll be posting up the answers to those questions next week. So Dartmouth College Fund, you've probably all heard of it. It's one of the most well-regarded annual giving programs in higher education. Dartmouth College Fund dates back to 1913, when a group of Dartmouth alumni decided to start something to help refurbish one of the dormitories at Dartmouth that had been burnt down, and has since been taken in by the college. It's an incredible program. It generates consistently $45 million a year for Dartmouth, which pretty much all goes into financial aid for students. It's also really well known for the very, very high participation rates that Dartmouth enjoys because of the loyalty of Dartmouth alumni. So we're delighted to have Sylvia and Tim here with us today. So Sylvia and Tim, the first question I wanted to ask you is, when the seriousness of COVID-19 became apparent in March, how did you initially respond at Dartmouth? What was your thinking?
Hi, Adrian. This is Sylvia. So I will start the conversation. And I want to welcome everyone here today. I'm so glad that you could join us. So on March 16th, with almost no warning, all of the staff transitioned to working from home. So first we had to deal with that great disruption. But also, we were right in the middle of two of our biggest month-long challenges in March. One was for participation and one was for leadership gifts. So we had to immediately face the decision if we should carry on with this effort. And to your previous point, Jason, we asked the question, should we do this particular thing? And after great deliberation and discussion, we decided the answer was yes. But we pivoted completely to alter the tone, the segmentation, and stewardship. And Tim is going to talk more about that. But let me just say a few words to describe the challenges. So the first one, the participation challenge, is for our youngest 20 classes, and it's traditionally our most successful participation challenge of the year. It runs the whole month of March, and it's very heavily volunteer driven, including a weekend when almost 100 volunteers come back to campus to solicit for 48 hours. Now that event was completely canceled. We also found that these younger volunteers were just less able to engage with us, as they also had transitioned themselves to working from home, and many of them have young children. Concurrently in March, we are running our Leadership Giving Society Challenge, where we have $500,000 in challenge money. And this challenge is a dollar for dollar match to encourage alumni to join our Leadership Giving Society. So the whole push is $1 million, including the challenge money. So we had a lot going on. So we knew, though, that we needed to be bold for Dartmouth students. And we felt that we just couldn't let the challenges whimper away. So we decided to go forward, but in going forward, the tone was really key here. Making the case for supporting students, but doing so with compassion in these unprecedented times. Now, you mentioned that the Dartmouth College Fund is our largest source of financial aid. So we decided to sharpen that message in the face of the economic downturn and what our students were facing financially. So for example, we were not focused on other emerging priorities like a student emergency relief fund. Dartmouth did launch such a fund, but the Dartmouth College Fund is separate. We developed the tagline, "The Dartmouth College Fund was built for this moment." And so I'm going to turn it over to Tim now, and he can describe how we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. So first, our Young Alumni Granite Challenge, that's a very public challenge. As Sylvia mentioned, is very volunteer driven, but we also had a pretty strong marketing presence, including a digital fundraising platform with a live data feed. And by mid-March, we had a lot of donors already. So we just couldn't disappear on them. So what we decided to do just immediately, while we were even thinking about anything, we just completely scrubbed that page and said, almost literally, be right back, we need to figure this out. And we also thanked the donors who had given already. And where we ended up is that we were going to pause until the end of March and then sort of pivot to a 48-hour challenge. Our volunteers still were not ready to move forward, but we thought it was important for us to sort of finish out this challenge. We changed the focus from a class competition to the theme of sort of community unity to help Dartmouth students. We just didn't feel that the competition angle was going to be the right tone. And then we changed the challenge structure there for a dollar-to-dollar match. We ended up having 5 emails on those 2 days, March 30th and 31st. We excluded New York and the New York region. And overall, the emails were well received with minimal pushback. We did get gifts that day, those 2 days, to close out the challenge. We were pleased with the results given the environment, but we certainly did not bring in the volume of gifts we typically did in prior years with that volunteer support. Now for our 1769 Society, the Leadership Challenge, that was not nearly as public. So we didn't have to really publicly pause so much. Now, fortunately, the direct mail piece, which is on the slide here, that had been mailed just prior to lockdown. So we were pretty comfortable with that direct mail piece being out there, that no one would think that we were being tone deaf because everyone knew it was mailed beforehand. But we did think very carefully about how to move forward, our volunteers as well as our email. And so we did pause and we waited until the conclusion of the Young Alumni Granite Challenge to see what sort of reaction we got before we made any decisions about how to move forward with the Leadership Challenge. And given the fact that we got really no pushback from the Young Alumni Challenge, we decided to move forward with the idea that we'll keep emailing people the prospects for the challenge until we run out of challenge money. Now, it turned out that we completely rewrote those emails, and it turned out that we only needed to send that one email on April 2nd. And in that email, we burned through the remainder of the challenge money. Now, the stewardship was a slightly different story. Our traditional stewardship piece was stuck in a mail house. So what we did was we have several students that work for us, as many schools do, and we asked one of them to send out thank you notes to anyone who made a gift during this challenge period. So that was how we pivoted on stewardship, while the main event could be deployed a few weeks later.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. I had a question. So as the situation is continuing from week to week and into the next month, could you take us through what the team did in April, what you guys did then?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Jason. Sylvia here again. So once we got through the challenges, we shifted to focus on volunteer encouragement and creating opportunities for our volunteers to reach out to their classmates, not necessarily to ask for a gift, but to see how they were doing. This was both authentic and reflects Dartmouth's strong alumni connections, but also we really wanted to give volunteers the encouragement and the courage to just pick up the phone and talk to their peers or use Zoom. So in mid-April, we had a webinar for volunteers, if we could go to the next slide, which was led by some of our most seasoned fundraisers who still had the courage to ask for a gift boldly and with compassion. This was not a webinar about the state of affairs at Dartmouth. The message was all about that students need us now more than ever, and we need to band together to ask for gifts. We also provided useful tactics and information on how to do that. Again, we really relied upon seasoned volunteers who could clearly articulate the case in the face of a crisis. Also, we maintained our regular practice of having monthly calls with individual class volunteer teams to keep them engaged. So this is a standard practice for our staff, where for classes, for those volunteers, we do check-in calls. And we found that, ironically, the attendance on these volunteers calls actually skyrocketed. I was quite surprised. People were eager to reach out and connect. For some classes that were particularly struggling, we added the touch point of a call with a member of the Board of Trustees who is an active fundraiser in her own class. Again, the point being here, encouragement and pride in what Dartmouth is already doing for our students. So I mentioned that we introduced the concept that the Dartmouth College Fund was built for this moment. We could go to the next slide. So we created a bunch of social media posts that volunteers could use if they chose to do so. And you can see in the lower right, there's the tagline, the Dartmouth College Fund was built for moments like these. We also pushed out to current and recent donors a stewardship piece that focused on what Dartmouth as an institution was doing to help students. And not only did we send this directly, but then we encouraged volunteers to forward this message to their classmates as a compassionate way to reach out.
This is really great, Sylvia. I mean, and one thing I should have mentioned is Dartmouth's volunteer network. They have over 2,000 class volunteers who help fundraise for the Dartmouth College Fund. So, you know, this is a critical constituency for you. And it's lovely to see this care that you're taking of them. So you mentioned the stewardship piece. So could you tell us a bit more about that and what you did for Giving Tuesday Now?
Sure, this is Tim. So, we had a really strong fiscal 19, and our fiscal 20 was off to a great start. We were running ahead of last year right up until mid-March. And so there was some real institutional pride in how Dartmouth responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so much of that response was from the fact that we had such a strong donor support. So we want to thank those recent donors because they really helped Dartmouth respond the way it did. So our copy focused on really what the college did and expressed gratitude for donor support. The donors who had given so far this fiscal year had no donor link. The donors who had given only in fiscal 19, they did have a button at the bottom of the email, but it was very subtle. And it really helped set the stage for us to move forward. Very rarely when we do things in this business do we get an overwhelming warm response back to us. And that's what we received. While it was a really strong institutional message, our volunteer chair of the Dartmouth College Fund committee, she was really able to add such a personal Dartmouth warm edits to the email, if you will. So what we got back was well worth the effort we put into it. Now, on Giving Tuesday Now, we pushed out 4 email appeals from our chair, from Sylvia, and from the Dartmouth College Fund. 2 of these emails in particular were specifically intended for staff and volunteers to forward or put into their own words. We heard from so many people, both staff members and volunteers, that they want to get out there, but they weren't sure what to say or when to say it. So these emails and Giving Tuesday Now really provided the content and the reason to get back out there. In terms of performance, our Giving Tuesday emails had an average open rate for Dartmouth. I would say they had a below average opt-out rate, and we only had a half a dozen complaints, which is really rare for us when we send 64,000 emails. In terms of the number of gifts, these emails brought in about half of what we'd hoped them to bring in. But again, part of our thinking behind this email series was really to give volunteers and staff the reason to get back out there.
Great, thank you, Tim. This is Jason Shough again, and I know we only have a few more minutes here, but one question I was curious about, and Sylvia, this would be for you, is how are you envisioning the next few months then through the end of fiscal year 20 and into fiscal year 21?
Well, thanks, Jason. So our original plan included 2 challenges in June. So again, we had asked the question, should we do this particular thing? And the answer for us is yes. But again, we're going to completely adjust our tone and segmentation. It's all about messaging. You can ask for anything. It's just a question of how you ask. So we can conclude with Tim sharing some points about how we are messaging.
Sure. Today, in fact, is a special day for Dartmouth. If you see on the next slide, Hal Ripley, class of 29, gave every year after he graduated, more than 80 years in a row. Today is his 113th birthday, and on his birthday, we always celebrate his shining example. We have a donor society named in his honor for all alumni who have made a gift every year since graduation. Not only are we connecting with those donors today who've given every year since graduation to renew their support to Dartmouth, but we're also reaching out to all recent donors with the message to support Dartmouth through thick and thin, as Hal did. And that's going on today. In June, we'll be running a series of challenges. Now, as I mentioned before, our challenges tend to be very class-based competitions, but that is just not right for this moment. So our theme will continue to be unity. For young alumni, our challenge will run the entire month of June. In mid-June, we'll have a regionally based Give Local sprint focused on the number of students receiving financial aid state by state. And the last week of June, of course, anything goes. Our campaign will feature a digital fundraising platform with live results, student-made videos ideal to share on social media, a texting campaign that will be run both alum to alum from our volunteers and student to alum from some of our student employees, and of course, lots of class outreach. And our messaging will stay focused on community unity, helping students, and that the Dartmouth College Fund was made for moments like this.
Thanks, Tim. That's incredibly inspiring, and I hope everybody listening has found this incredibly inspiring too, about how you've just taken the core ethos and put it out there in such a wonderfully creative and appropriate way. Tim, Sylvia, thank you so much for coming on this afternoon and taking time out from what is an incredibly busy schedule to share this insight and wisdom with us. We're terrifically grateful.
Happy to do it, Adrian and Jacob.
Brilliant. And thank you, everybody who's tuned in. We are now at past, so we're going to leave it there. We hope you've found this, really useful, inspiring, that you've found takeaways for your own programs. And we look forward to coming back to you with your answers to your questions early next week. And so happy Friday. And when it arrives, wherever you are, have wonderful weekends. Thanks very much.